Good morning, Washington, D.C. It's great to be here. I went to the wrong building this morning, and now I'm here with you just in time, so thank you for your patience. We live in a world of numbers. Everything in our world fundamentally comes from counting transactions, trees in a forest, CO2 emissions, presidential election outcomes. All around us, people are keeping track of how the world is developing. One of the things that struck us back in 2005 was that despite all of these numbers and tracking, few people were actually definitively reporting how people's lives were going from citizens themselves. When we started this work, a lot of people were very skeptical and were wondering why an organization like Gallup that's focused on economics, politics, society, why we would care about well-being. And we really felt that there was a story that wasn't being told with classic metrics. And that was really the motivation for the Gallup World Poll. The map you see in front of you represents everywhere in the world we've been consistently tracking how people are living their lives since 2006. And it wasn't easy. We've been spending the past several years going east, south, in every direction we can to try to come up with a way to enable, to empower citizens to speak up for themselves about how they were living their lives. And when I say it wasn't easy, it really wasn't easy. This is a sampling frame map from our polls in Nigeria. And every dot you see is essentially a unit within which we conduct our surveys. We build these units based on population density, based on demographic information in the country. We do this in every country that we've been tracking since 2005. And here's what we found, that even though we live in a world of numbers, some of the numbers that aren't really being focused on can actually tell us the most about what's happening in a society. I'm originally from Egypt, and I joined Gallup in 2008 to focus on the Middle East, try to understand how young people were experiencing their lives in that part of the world through asking them questions. One of the most fascinating findings we looked at as the Arab Spring ended was to go back to our data sets and try to understand, was there anything in the countries that saw unrest that would have been an indicator or a sign to leaders that something was not right? What we found is that even though GDP per capita was rising at a pretty healthy rate in Egypt, people's own life evaluation actually was crashing. So the green line that you see is a numeric estimate of how people evaluate their own lives. Some people call it well-being. We measure well-being in a lot of different ways. Life evaluation for us is simply asking people on a scale from 0 to 10, and you can think about this for yourself now. Imagine where your life is today on that scale, if 10 was the best life you could imagine and 0 was the worst life. And where do you expect your life to be in the next 5 years on that scale? We ask that question in local languages, through local people all over the world. What we found in Egypt was that thriving, how people were actually evaluating their own lives, was crashing at a time when GDP per capita and a lot of other classic metrics looked like they were doing pretty healthy, pretty good. We saw the same thing in a few other countries in the region at the same time. Tunisia, Syria, Bahrain, and a couple others I won't mention because the difference wasn't that drastic. But basically what we saw across the countries that experienced unrest in the Middle East around 2011 to 2012 were the countries where life evaluation was actually tanking. Many of these countries, Egypt and Tunisia in particular, were receiving awards from the World Bank, the World Economic Forum, and others, rightfully so, for privatization efforts, for a lot of macroeconomic reforms that were presented as really critical to state stability to these nations. So they did their homework to some degree on the economics, but nobody was tracking how people actually lived their lives. So that's a really interesting story about the Middle East. What we found is that actually this has been happening in a lot of places. This is the United Kingdom before the Brexit vote. You'll see it's a very similar trajectory. This was also true in Ukraine before the Euromaidan revolution. It was also true here in the US before the election of Donald Trump. So as our researchers were going through these data sets, trying to look back on situations of unrest or perhaps just an unexpected political outcome to try to understand how were people evaluating their lives in those countries where we saw these changes. After 5 million interviews across the world, we've come to one of the reasons why this has been happening. Another thing we mention, in addition to life evaluation, is experiential well-being. So we ask people, we've now asked over 5 million people across the world, have they experienced a lot of anger, stress, worry, physical pain, or sadness in the day before we did the interview? What you're about to see is a trend of the entire world on those several metrics built into an index score. And it tells a pretty clear story. There has been a consistent rise in worry, stress, anger, physical pain, and sadness across the world. The billions of people that this metric represents don't necessarily have the lowest income in the world. They don't necessarily live in the poorest countries. They don't necessarily live in societies that are very free or very not free. This is something totally different. This is about understanding the world through the voice of individuals, through the actual experts, the only experts that really exist on how their life is going. But you might ask yourself, why? Why are people's experiences heading in this direction? The why is really captured in this slide. The same life evaluation metrics that we've been asking people on a scale from 0 to 10 today in the next 5 years helped us find something across the world that was actually more pernicious than income inequality. It's actually well-being inequality. And what you're looking at here are the folks in the top 20% of life evaluation metrics in the world and the folks at the very bottom. What we've learned is that people who are living a great life have never rated it higher than they are today. But people who are not living a great life have never rated it more poorly than they are today. Why? Our research really uncovered 5 critical facts about what makes a great life based on this work across the world. And you'll notice that some of these will sound really relevant to us. Some of them may not sound as relevant, but I want you to imagine people in very different political, economic, income situations assessing their lives on these metrics. The people at the top 20% are fulfilled by the work they do. They have little financial stress. They live in great communities. They have good physical health. And they have ones they can rely on for help when they need it. If you just think about those 5 dimensions of a life, you can be insanely wealthy or just making it by and check the box on all those things. The people at the bottom of the scale, the bottom 20%, they're people who don't have a quality job. Their income is not enough for them to get by on the life that they're trying to live. They live in broken communities. They're hungry or malnourished. And they don't have anyone in their life that they can count on for help. To transition now to our panel and to talk about why this matters to workplaces, it's really important to understand that this research has already proven that money does not buy happiness. Actually, there's a certain limit beyond which people don't evaluate their lives much better if they're getting paid more. It actually just kind of flattens out. And in the US, it's about 75,000K pre-inflation. But while money does not buy happiness, it's really hard to be happy without it, at least to be able to cover your basic needs. One of the most important factors of well-being is work well-being, which has nothing to do with how much you make. It has to do with how you feel about what you do for a living, how you feel about the people you work with, how you feel about the mission and purpose of the organization you are serving. Throughout all of our well-being research, we found that people's attitudes, perceptions of their work are one of the most important factors in how we evaluate our lives on that scale from 0 to 10, whether it's here in the United States or it's in Egypt, where I came from. There is a huge jobs crisis in the United States and in the world, and it's not unemployment. That line used to make a lot more sense when unemployment was high. But there is a huge job crisis in the lack of quality jobs. Having a job doesn't really tell us anything because it's a box that's checked to count the numbers, but it has nothing to do with how people feel about the work that they're doing. 12 billion workdays are lost annually due to depression and anxiety. I can go on, but if you've ever led a team, you get it. You understand that how people feel about the work they do is absolutely essential to how they perform. And the research, our research for decades has shown that it's absolutely essential to the bottom line of your business. With that, I want to welcome my two fellow panelists up to the stage. I love this music.
You love the music.
All right. Misty Gaither is head of diversity, inclusion, and belonging at Indeed. Misty, welcome.
Thank you.
Patty Rillberger is VP of Corporate Social Responsibility at Entergy. Welcome.
Good morning.
You both are ladies that really walk the walk and live everything I just presented from a lot of different perspectives. Misty, I want to speak to you about a project you all have been involved in with Born This Way Foundation. The Kindness in the Workplace report was fascinating for me to read through. I'd love for you to just take us through some of the findings from that report.
Sure. Good morning. My name is Misty Gaither. My pronouns are she and her. And so Indeed actually commissioned or partnered with the Born This Way Foundation for the report. And what we found in that report is that, you know, kindness and workplace well-being and mental health are the priority for what we call young workers. So when I say young, I'm not calling anyone old. I actually don't fall into that categorization myself, but it's focused on the population of 18 to 29-year-olds. And so they are really, really looking at companies to determine how we're prioritizing kindness and well-being in our workplaces. And so when we think about the topic of, you know, talent retention and what we've coined as either the great resignation or the great realization, you know, it's really giving us an opportunity to lean in on how we actually create inclusive environments where people can truly thrive. So I'll just share a couple of statistics. And so, you know, when we surveyed the Gen Z and young millennials, about 89% of them see mental health and kindness as high priorities in the workplace. And when we think about creating a workplace that can help you all recruit and retain your employee base, about 80% of respondents were more likely to apply for a job where it listed kindness or some company value that alluded to a sense of inclusion or a sense of belonging. And then lastly, young people want pay that is stronger and benefits that are more equitable. And when we did this survey, we were intentional in the audience. And so it was really thoughtful around the Black, Indigenous, people of color community, as well as the LGBTQ plus community. And those two segments of the population tend to actually work multiple jobs. And so that's why they're really evaluating companies to see if it's a good quality job.
Awesome. Patty, I'd love for you to react to that, but also to tell us a little bit about the culture you all have developed at Entergy as it relates to this topic.
Well, really, really interesting to hear your research and your results, and inspired by it as well, because at Entergy, diversity, inclusion, and belonging is one of our core values. So I was really happy to hear what you had to share about the importance of that, not just for millennials, but for all workers. So our goal at Entergy is to become the premier utility. And we know that the only way that we can do that is if each and every one of the 13,000 men and women who work at our company feel empowered to bring their full authentic selves to the workplace every single day. And that's where diversity, inclusion, and belonging is key. And so we work to foster that culture at our company. And it might help a little bit to define the terms. And the way that we define those terms is diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance, but belonging is when they're playing your jam. And so really we want people to feel that sense of belonging. And that comes down to building trust and caring among the individuals on your team. And so we work to foster all of those values at our company, not only internally, but also externally with some of the community organizations that we work with. And I'll talk a little bit about one group. The Anti-Defamation League has a phenomenal program called No Place for Hate. And it's a program K through 12 schools. And it's designed to help school leaders foster cultures of inclusivity and diversity among on their school campus. And these days, I think it's more important than ever. I think 1 in 4 students reports feeling bullied at school. Wow. And part of that stems from children not understanding differences, not having tools to deal with those differences. And the No Place for Hate program does that. And it's through our partnership with the ADL, it's been about 13 years, we've been able to provide the program free of charge to schools across Arkansas, Louisiana, and Mississippi. And we feel that it's important to instill these values in children because they are our future workforce. And so much the better when our employees come to us with those values already instilled. So,
Missy, I wanted to ask you, it is a world unlike the world before with hybrid. Belonging, inclusion, diversity, connecting, development opportunities, all of these things have been known and studied and discussed and acted on for generations. But 2 years ago, 3 years ago now, our whole world has changed in terms of where we work and how we work. How has hybrid impacted some of these efforts? How has it enabled some of these efforts at creating a more kind and inclusive workplace?
So I think working in a remote or virtual or hybrid environment has helped because we are now seeing inside of each other's homes. I think we've been able to see people for who they are and not just what they do at the company. And at all levels of our organization, we've really seen the imperfections, right? From the CEO down to your entry-level employee. We've heard the dogs barking, we hear the children crying, some people have made cameos, and so we've really had to rethink, how we work with each other. And I think what that's dialed up is a level of compassion and empathy and vulnerability. And so my hope is that as we really start to talk about return to office and we think about the future of work in this new environment, that we don't lose all of those elements that have really strengthened the relationships. And so I think it's also ensured that we are supporting people from a mental health perspective. If you think about before the pandemic and someone's like, hey, how are you? You're like, I'm fine, I'm good. And you just keep going. And then now somebody's like, how are you? You're like, actually, not having the best day. And so I think what has happened, and what I like to say is, as a leader, we're responsible for being open and authentic because that gives our teams permission to do the same. And so we've been able to problem solve and actually maybe even reallocate work as a result of just understanding the impact of all of these world events on everyone at our companies in ways we likely would not be able to do if folks are just buttoned up like we are today, looking nice and perfect and just going in to do our jobs, right? So I think it's really given us a nice lens into the humanity of everything.
That's exactly what I was going to comment on. One of the silver linings, I think, of the past 2 or 3 years that we've been through the pandemic and everything is that we've been able to be a little more real and a little more human with each other. And I hope that we keep that as we move into whatever this next phase is going to be for our companies. One of the things that we've experienced at Entergy had a culture that was We were 100% on-site, not remote, hybrid, nothing. That was not part of our company culture. We worked pretty much remotely for the past 20 months, and now we're back. And we've realized we can do this. This can work. It's not going to impact productivity. And what has happened is now when employees need some flexibility because of a circumstance or a situation in their life, one of our team members is a grandmother, and her daughter is in the Army, and she had to deploy, and she has small children. She asked for permission to work remotely for a month so that she could help take care of the grandchildren while her daughter was deployed. And before the pandemic, that would have been, oh no, that's not going to work. And now it's like, oh yeah, we can do this. You can do this. And so those are the sorts of learnings that I hope we carry forward.
Okay, I'm going to totally throw the proverbial grenade now and ask you both, what about the other side? Hybrid, it's so true, has empowered so many of us to live more balanced lives. When we ask people why they prefer a hybrid setting, the first three things they mention is they don't want to do the commute, it's better for their well-being, and it's better for their family. So as an employer, good luck overcoming those factors in someone's life. It's so central to who we are. But the other side of it is, it's changed how we connect with our colleagues and coworkers. It's created challenges for how we can create development opportunities for new people who are joining our team. One of my personal experiences with the hybrid, non-hybrid world is, it works really great for me with people I've been working with for over a decade. It's been not so great to build the kind of human, person-to-person relationships that I need to build with people who are joining my team. Am I just in an island on my own? I want you all to reflect on those challenges. Obviously, we're finding ways to get around them. So maybe we can focus on how we do that.
I don't have any answers, but I totally agree. Definitely harder with those new relationships. And I think we have to be more intentional about how we connect and how we relate to people, but I don't have answers. Misty?
So my team actually grew significantly during the pandemic. So over 50% of my team, and they're globally distributed, started at some point during 2020 and up until a couple of months ago. And so you nailed it. It's just being intentional, and it's getting to know people, appropriately personally and obviously professionally, and creating whatever type of environment you can for folks that are in the office, and seeing what happens organically as well. When I think about, opportunities for growth and advancement, like that's still something we're figuring out in terms of future of work. But I think about like proximity bias or recency bias, and we've all been on a Zoom call and they forget to turn the Zoom off, right? And some people are in the office and you see the meeting after the meeting is happening. And you're like, wait, what's going on? And so it leads to a sense of exclusion. And so it's actually getting really clear about what are your policies and what are some of the best practices that you're putting in place, right? So how do you take that conversation and socialize it beyond that meeting? And leaders really have to be held accountable to that. So one of the, a tactical thing I would say to address that is ensuring that if there is a high visible, high impact project that's available, there's a rule in place that it has to be presented to an entire team, not just a subset of a team before someone is assigned, and really thinking about the distribution of work so that it's not going to the same crew of workers that are, let's say, in a headquarter location in comparison to a more satellite office or an office that has a lower occupancy. But I do think that it is something that's difficult. We don't know the answers, and we're all just figuring things out through trial and error. I'm sorry that you are having a difficult time with your new
No, that's, and I think we're doing the same. I think we're all really doing the same, and it really touches so much of what we're talking about with well-being, how to treat people, why it's important in a work setting. One of the other really big changes I've felt since this hybrid work and the pandemic has kind of come and hopefully gone, is a focus on mental health in the workplace. I grew up in LA, and I'm 42, so when I grew up, the only people that had a shrink were like celebrities and rich people. The pandemic didn't bring this to the mainstream, but I think a lot of us who didn't feel comfortable talking about mental health in the workplace context now feel that it's a completely legitimate thing to be on the lookout for as a leader, to create spaces for people in the workplace to deal with those issues. How do we do that as a corporation that's trying to focus on customers? Where do we find the balance in making sure that mental health is an important part of what we're focusing on for our workers, for our customers even, but it isn't getting in the way of us getting our jobs done?
So I'll jump in first and then turn it over to Misty. But if our employees aren't in a good place mentally, and their families are not in a good place, then they're not going to have their full selves and their full attention at work. They're not going to be able to do their very best in terms of taking care of our customers. And so we need to prioritize that and make sure that people understand that that they need to pay attention to how they are doing, and if something is not right, to reach out and use the tools that are made available to them to address whatever those issues may be. I was at, a couple years ago, I was attending a conference that was held at Deloitte Touche offices in Detroit, and I was really impressed. They had these signs around their building, and they were part of their employee assistance program, and it talked about how you need to make sure that you put your own put the oxygen mask on yourself first, because then you'll be able to take care of your family, then you'll be able to pay attention to your job. And they had a very robust employee assistance program, and they made tools available to their employees. And so, that awareness is really important, and letting people know that it's okay to take advantage of those tools and not be stigmatized by it.
Yeah, I think, Patty, you're absolutely right in the sense that if your employees are not well, then they are totally not going to be the best to serve your customers. It's interesting that we think about mental health as separate from just overall health. And so I think that's one thing we can actually start to do differently and just look at it more holistically. The fact that the World Health Organization declared burnout as a real diagnosis just a few years ago is something that lets us know that mental health is something that we need to really focus on destigmatizing. And EAP benefits are great, but think about the time of when you're recommending an EAP benefit. It's at a moment of crises. It's when there is a performance issue and you're using that as a last resort before the next level of escalation. And I think it's important to understand the responsibility we all have as employers to have more robust, like whether it's programs, whether it's services, and the education around how to fully utilize them and reduce the barrier. So when we conducted our survey, over 30% of people say that they actually can't access mental health benefits because of the financial burden, or 70% say they're not as aware of them. And the last thing is making sure that they are equitable. And so when you talk about mental health being stigmatized for certain communities, the Black community is one, the Latinx community is another, and definitely the LGBTQ+ community. So if you think about who you're partnering with for your benefits, you really need to educate them as well on the importance of having providers that actually match the demographic of your workplace, so that they don't have to necessarily relive trauma as they're trying to explain what is making it difficult for them to focus at work. And so I think, again, it's just looking at it as a holistic approach, like physical health and mental health can no longer be separated. And there are a lot of other, boutique things that are popping up where they do matching for your employees that you can bring in to really increase the utilization of those benefits as they're needed.
Thank you. One of the things that has really struck out in our data at Gallup is the experience millennials are having with burnout right now. It's fascinating that we live in a time where there's a premium on talent, irrespective of inflation. I think everybody in this room is probably understaffed, looking for workers, looking for the right people to join their organization. Younger workers care about this stuff a lot more, and they talk about it a lot more in our work. That's what we found. So whether it is access to mental health support, whether it is the way the business that I work for does business, are they polluting the environment? Are they treating if it's retail, are they treating their suppliers in an equitable way? These things are actually more important to younger workers than other generations. Do you all see that on your teams and in what you do?
I'll share a couple of examples. So my role at the company, I run the social responsibility team. So we have responsibility for philanthropy and volunteerism, community engagement, and those types of programs, which, as you mentioned, are more important now to the millennial generation than perhaps previous generations. Two examples. There's an initiative that Entergy has supported for many years in Arkansas with the Nature Conservancy that worked for a long time to restore an area of, I think it was the White River, back to its natural state and make it available for hunters and recreation and camping and all of this. And we did interviews after this was all done. And one of the employees who participated, volunteering on the initiative said it talked about how much it mattered to him that the company cares about the things that he cares about and the places that he and his family go to enjoy for recreation and boating. And he said, it just matters to me that I work for a company that does this for my community. And another example, we have supported for many years the American Indian College Fund, and unbeknownst to us, one of the local tribes ran in their newsletter a little piece about a couple of the students who received scholarships, and an Entergy employee who was a tribe member got the newsletter and then later reached out to my team to say, wow, I didn't know that the company did this, and it means so much to me that the company cares about my community, that they're doing this. Those are the sorts of things that I think reap so much value in terms of employee retention. So those are my examples.
Yeah.
Yeah, so interestingly enough, like our mission at Indeed is to help people get jobs. And so we always are thinking about the impact on the job seeker and our commitment to society. I lead diversity, inclusion, equity, belonging, and it sits under the environmental, social, and governance organization at Indeed. So we're always thinking about our impact on society in terms of carbon emissions. We think about social impact, and so every issue that's happening globally, we actually have what we call compassion circles or brave spaces where we bring in mental health experts so we can talk about the impact that these occurrences are having on our employee base. And what that shows is that we have a true commitment to really understanding people on a more intimate level because we recognize the impact it has on how they show up at work. And so, we've had some folks say, I've never been in a space where I can actually be this vulnerable and I can show this level of emotion and it not be held against me, but it actually has benefited my employee growth and development. And so what we're finding is that employees now or job seekers, they're interviewing us like probably harder than we're interviewing them. And so they are really looking for the through line to what's on your website, what's on your social media, what's the background of folks that are in leadership positions, what is your board doing, and what does that look like day to day? And so for them, they want to find real meaning in their work. They really believe in having purpose and driving impact in ways that we didn't think about it before. When I first entered the workforce, it was like, I got a great job, let me get a good income, and I'm here, and then I'm going to go home. Right now, there's really no separation, and so the workplace is really a sense of community where people find a sense of belonging. And there was a report recently that talked about the amount of time that you spend with coworkers relative to family, relative to your children, and we spend a lot of time together with people we work with. And so imagine the impact on society when you can galvanize a group of folks around an issue or multiple issues, and then your business is also supporting that as well.
Yeah, I think that if it's the same report, I think they said that you spend 81,000 hours of your life working, which adds up to like 9 years.
Wow.
Which I don't tell that to young people starting their career, it sounds like. But, a lot of my reaction to that, just right now, is defined by the generation I come from, right? If our relationship with work is focused more or is informed more by the things you just mentioned. Those 81,000 hours or 9 years are gonna feel a lot different, right? Than the, oh my God, 81,000 hours, I gotta stare at the screen and plug away these answers. To close, I wanna ask you both to share your best advice with this audience on how a business can support their employees' well-being. I ask that with the knowledge that some of us are really large organizations with huge boards and policies and plans. Some of us are small organizations that don't necessarily have those resources. What is advice that you can give that could be applied in all different situations? How does an employer demonstrate that they really care about their employees' well-being?
Misty, you start.
So I would say, regardless of the size of your organization, if you take a step back, I think one of the best things you can do is hire people that have backgrounds that will actually give you the information you need to actually serve the population. So if you're thinking about your total rewards team, your compensation team, your benefits team, if there is a lack of representation on those teams, it's likely that it's going to show up in the benefits that you put forward as a company. So I think starting there, what we've done at Indeed, we have what we call an iRewards Council. So many folks have employee resource groups. We call them inclusion resource groups. And so there's a representative from all 10, and they meet with our total rewards leader to bring forth ideas and information and organizations that might not be on the radar of a total rewards leader. And so that also helps to inform the strategy. And we've actually seen some pretty significant changes in a lot of our benefits that's making them more equitable and inclusive of all populations. And then lastly, I would say don't be afraid to admit what you don't know. I think crowdsourcing is sometimes really, really helpful. And it doesn't have to be a top-down approach. I think definitely talking to folks that are newer in the organization that are bringing new ideas can also help with figuring out the best way to support well-being from a policy and a procedural standpoint. And lastly, I would say if someone brings forth an issue or a sentiment, I would say believe them. Let's not be dismissive of feelings of other folks, especially if it's different from your perspective. And just create that safe space, because I think that goes a long way, because it gives us information that we can then use to maybe build better environments for our employees.
I would encourage people to leverage the power of your employee resource groups, because those groups provide safe places where people can connect and share and be vulnerable, but they also provide a tremendous resource to the employer for insight in terms of how can we do a better job of addressing the needs that you have. So
I would only add that you also need to measure the well-being of your employees, because all of the things you mentioned are so critical, but are they working? And that's how we at least tackle the concept of well-being at work, is that measurement.
At Entergy, we do an inclusive climate survey that looks at inclusivity from two perspectives. We measure how employees feel personally. How do you personally feel included, and do you have a sense of belonging here? And then how do you feel about the company? Is the company inclusive? Does the company foster camaraderie and teamwork? And we measure that on an annual basis and share all of those results and take action on places where we need to take action.
All right, folks, that's Misty Gaither from Indeed and Patty Riddlebarger from Entergy. Thank you for listening to us this morning.
Thank you.